control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
Yeah. Remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media.
I was wondering who did that. Thanks.
Ain't nothing to it. A baby could do it.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I'm a human being, god damn it! My life has value! It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
We make this judgment affirmatively. It will be an entire nation.
All right, guys. Hello, I'm Verstine, and welcome to Truth or Talk. I'm Verstine Henry, your host. Today, I have with me Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman, Andy Kaufman, MD, is a natural healing consultant, inventor, public speaker, forensic psychiatrist, and expert witness. He completed his psychiatric training at Duke University Medical Center after graduating from the Medical University of South Carolina, and has a Bachelor of Science from MIT in molecular biology. He has conducted and published original research and lectured, supervised, and mentored medical students, residents, and fellows in all psychiatric specialties. Specialities, I think. He has been qualified as an expert witness in local, state, and federal courts. He has held leadership positions in academic medicine and professional organizations. He ran a startup company to develop a medical device he invented and patented. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Kaufman. So, what was the device that you invented and patented?
Well, you make me sound like a really busy guy there.
I was thinking, like, you work a lot, don't you? You work a lot.
So yeah, it was the medical device was actually a suicide detection device that I was trying to use in hospitals and jails where there are a disproportionate number of suicides, and almost all of them occur by hanging or asphyxiation. So that was basically it was like a piece of tape, a monitor you put behind your ear, and it would signal an alarm if you were attempting suicide, and in enough time for someone to come and rescue you.
Wait, so like people that were already locked up, or people that were like in like wards and stuff?
No, people that were locked up in a jail and in any part of the jail who had a risk of suicide, and people in hospitals, in general medical beds and psychiatric beds, that they're actually quite a number of suicides. It's much higher than the general population, even in those settings. And it may be surprising to people, but this actually occurs.
So, like, I'm now, it's a little bit off subject, but I'm just curious about how does this work? Do your chemicals change? Like, how do you know if they're like, what if, like, if it's a gun, if it's like, or if they have a sharp object, or like how?
Well, over 90% of the suicides in those settings occur by hanging, which causes strangulation. So it basically cuts off the blood supply to the carotid arteries. And you only need 5 kilograms of pressure on a ligature to do that. So people could be like, get some sheets and attach it to a ligature point, like bars on a window, for example, or a pipe in the ceiling. And they could hang themselves, and within about 5 to 7 minutes, they would be deceased. So this has happened in like hospital bathrooms, hospital patient rooms, various places in jail cells and bathrooms. So people who are deemed at risk would wear this device, and it would be part of a wireless mesh network in the building, which they already really have these kinds of networks these days. And basically it would just signal an alarm. And like in a jail or prison, actually, there are in every ward these things called cut down tools. And it's basically a safe tool that you can quickly cut through a sheet or a rope or any kind of ligature for this purpose. And I've been involved in several lawsuits where this has happened. So it's a lot more common than people know about it, because people don't like to talk about things related to suicide.
Yeah,
that was a major focus of my forensic psychiatry career, and I even wrote a book chapter on correctional suicide in a forensic psychiatry textbook.
Oh, wow. Wow. I just want to take you back because before I started the recording, I was talking about how overjoyed I am when I see doctors that are able to go against the grain and speak out about stuff that they're really not taught about in medical school. So I would like to know, what was your paradigm shift like as a doctor that has gone through you, because you've had a lot of training, obviously. What was that like for you to kind of realize? And I remember you also made in one of the interviews, I heard you say that you were taught in medical school 50% of what you learn in medical school will be proven false. So
Yeah.
what was it like to find that out? You're like, yeah, more than that, right? But
Well,
what
they
was
tell
that
you-
like for you?
Yeah, well, that they tell you right at the beginning, like during orientation, and you're so excited to just be in medical school finally after all the hard work. So it's not really the right time to stop and think about it. And it sort of just, it made an impression on me, but I didn't really consider the full ramifications of that statement until later on. But essentially what happened is through medical school, they keep you so busy that it's hard to, look at anything from an objective point of view, because you just have to consume so much information and be able to regurgitate that to whoever asks. So I didn't really start to see things as going really wrong until I was in my residency and I started practicing and seeing patients. And I started noticing that no one was really getting better from the medications that I was told to prescribe. And of course, this was troubling. And then I remember toward the end of my residency, I was participating in this journal club, and there was an article where they declassified all of the studies as part of an FDA investigation. Application for an antidepressant. And so this was obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. And a scientist combined all of the results from the unpublished studies that he obtained with the published studies, which were all favorable. And the conclusion was essentially there was no difference between a placebo and the antidepressant. And so this was the first real hard evidence I had that antidepressants don't do anything really other than give you a placebo effect. And of course I thought, well, oh my gosh, based on this, we should stop prescribing this drug. But that's not what happened, that the supervisors and other doctors there were happy to continue prescribing it.
Well, didn't you also, I remember talk about one of your interviews that you were you doing a residency with cancer patients or something?
Yeah, no, but that's before I went to medical school. I was a physician assistant, and I was on the faculty of Medical University of South Carolina at that time, worked on mostly on the inpatient bone marrow transplant unit, where we took care of all of the people with blood-related cancers like leukemia and lymphoma, and also people with all sorts of other types of blood disorders, some of them quite rare. And so that's where I worked in cancer medicine. And I also did some time in the regular, they called it the solid tumors clinic, working with breast cancer and lung cancer and things like that. And I really enjoyed that job because I got to develop close relationships with the patients and, as they went through the dying process. And that was very satisfying. But later on, in retrospect, I realized that, nobody got better from those treatments. Virtually no one. I mean, virtually every single person died as a result of their cancer. And I didn't, the chemotherapy sometimes gave them a little bit of a reprieve, but many times it didn't. And certainly they were some of the sickest people in the hospital. So I really learned how to take care of people who were extremely sick, which was useful skills to have. But I think it was really unnecessary that we were just making things worse. And later on, I learned that there are other ways that are just much, much more successful.
So I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you. I'm trying to humanize you. I just want to know, emotionally, what is that like for a doctor that goes in and you want to help people, right? And you're trained to help people. You've gone through all this training, and then you find out what you've been taught is wrong. Were you sad? Were you angry? Were you depressed? Did it did you question your own sanity?
Yeah, well, I think I had a different reaction from most. And yes, I definitely was angry. I felt duped, that I was being misled or lied to about these things. And I just could not bring myself to write certain prescriptions. And, this was a gradual process. It didn't happen all at once because there's a big obstacle for doctors with this because you go through a long training and you have a lot of delayed gratification. So during medical school, you're poor, you're dirt poor, and you're working crazy hours and studying all the time. There's no time for a life outside of that for most people. And then in residency, you're getting paid a little bit, but not really enough to even pay back your student loans. I heard that the average medical student has something like $200,000 in debt by the time they're finished. Personally, I had more than that, actually. And so you working really hard, long hours during your residency, and then you're like getting to that point where you're gonna finally make some money. And what happens usually is that people, they go out and immediately start buying things like a house, a nice car. Maybe they send their kids to private school, and so they get into more debt. And they're in a cycle where they have to keep working in order to keep paying back the debt because they might realize there's serious consequences to that for them. Like, they would maybe lose their home, their car would be repossessed, maybe their spouse would leave them. It would be a really potentially bad situation. So I think what happens is when every doctor, I think, unless they're really just not paying attention at all, they're going to come to a point where they realize what they're doing is not helpful. And in many cases actually hastens people's death. And when they have that moment that they realize that, they're going to probably say, if I take action based upon this and really question it, boy, what's going to happen to my life? I can't be a doctor anymore. How am I going to make a living? What's going to happen to my family? And then they probably say to themselves, you know what? This was a silly thought in the first place. Of course, I'm doing the right thing. I'm a doctor. I'm helping people. And then they go back to what they're doing.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance, absolutely. And so that's why for me, like I first tried to practice in the conventional system in such a way that I could at least minimize harm. And then over time, became more aggressive at that and ultimately got into a point where I'm actually trying to do some really good things once I learned what the alternatives are and how to work with people to heal them naturally. But there's limitations. I had a unique position that I'm still in right now, partly, but I've just reduced it because I'm trying to move towards natural healing, completely. But for most people, they just are not willing to make that transition or take the risk of doing something different.
Do you think that's why doctors have like a high suicide rate?
Well, I think that's got to be a big part of it. And that is an excellent point because, the general population, what they think about doctors is, oh, they're well respected, they're smart, they're wealthy, right? But if they're so, all of those things, why do they have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession and also one of the highest rates of substance abuse?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so some of the other factors are, just how hard they have to work, how many hours they have to put in, and it's very invasive for a lot of physicians. And the pressure that's on them to do the right thing. They could be sued, they could be held responsible, get in trouble, all kinds of things like that. So it's and then the big factor recently is the electronic health records. That is supposedly the top cause of physician burnout, and I think has a lot to do with this, because it's not just that you have to now type, whereas before you could just dictate, but it's basically what happens is you go on this program and you can't just do your own thing anymore. All these things pop up and say, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And they're basically following the hospital's algorithms of their treatment recommendations. And that you feel like if you don't do what they want, you'll get in trouble somehow. You'll get sued, or the hospital administration will talk to you. And so it's like you don't even have the autonomy to make your own clinical decisions anymore. And so combine all those factors together, I think, that has a lot to do with the substance abuse and the suicide.
I was a teacher for a while, and I kind of feel a little bit like that too. It's like it was getting, I'm not saying that teachers and doctors are the same thing, but that was one thing that really frustrated me too. I was being told what to teach and how to teach it.
Yeah.
And it's like very enslaving. And just even talking about the whole debt situation with doctors, it's like indentured servitude,
Yeah,
man.
that's slavery.
Yeah, it's terrible. Okay, so we'll change gears a little bit. I just wanted to ask one more thing. Do you have any colleagues that agree with that share your position? Or did you lose friends, or did you have people that, yeah?
Well, I'll tell you, since I've been speaking out publicly and getting my message out there, I have had many doctors and other health professionals reach out to me and offer solidarity, sometimes offer me information, or even to do research for me, which has been amazing. In fact, if there are any serious researchers out there that want to help get the truth about this virus situation, please do contact me through my website, which I'll give a little bit later on. So that has been great, but at the same time, I have actually lost a lot of not just colleagues, but friends. So this happened just a week and a half ago, that there were 3 different doctor and PA friends that I went to school with and had a very close relationship with in the past. And they basically, called me names and said that they're done with me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So there is also that aspect to it. I didn't mention that before about other physicians, but you risk being ostracized. You risk you're losing your license possibly.
Yeah.
Like I have to, when I do natural healing consultation, it's not the practice of medicine, and I have to be very clear about that. And I never examine anyone or do any laboratory work or anything like that. Actually, none of that is necessary at all.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, it's not.
But I'm just providing information, and that's a way. So it's like a different, totally different model. But I tell you that, especially lately, I've just been meeting some amazing people who want to learn some information about their health, and they are taking charge of their health. They're doing all the work to restore their body to a fit state. And it's just such a treat to see people like that, because in the conventional medical system, especially in psychiatry, you got a lot of miserable people that come to you, and they are just expecting a pill is going to magically, transform their life into something good. And it never works that way.
We're not built like that as humans, for it to work. If you want a pill or a vaccine, it must be really gratifying though when you have people that want to work on their health. I was looking at, I forgot this one doctor, and she like specialized in natural healing, and she was like, I asked my patients, do you want to get better? She goes, before I even work with anybody, she goes, that's what she asked them, because she's like, well, I'm going to tell you, you're going to basically have to change your lifestyle and what you put into your body. And if you're not willing to do that, then, I can't help you, So do you know Dr. Humphreys, Suzanne Humphreys? Do you know of her?
I've heard the name, but I don't know any specifics.
So she's a brilliant doctor. She gives a lot of her lectures on there. You can watch a lot of her lectures online, but she talks about basically when she was in medical school and how she went against the grain. She compared it to being like in a gang or like in a cult. And, like with the sleep deprivation you're talking about too, and just like you're just getting input of information, not allowed to ask any questions. If you do ask something out of the normal, you're ostracized, and then getting out, basically like what you were just saying, like your friends calling you names. It's like they come after you. And I'm sure there are people that are still not saying nice things about you. So that's why I wanted to kind of open up with that segment about like your background and how it affects you. I want to humanize you a little bit, because I don't know if enough people really understand what doctors go through who don't go the conventional route. So the virus stuff. What is a virus?
Well, the word originally comes from the Latin, and it means a noxious substance or poison. And it was talked about in relationship to disease before anybody was able to see anything under a microscope that they called that. And they basically had a theory that there was some unseen biological agent that was causing disease. And so when germ theory took root about the turn of the 20th century, they could see different bacteria associated with certain diseases, and they blamed the bacteria as the cause of those diseases, even without clear evidence. But they also assumed that because there were some illnesses that they didn't find bacteria, like, for example, polio. So they basically assumed they must be caused by a virus. And then when the electron microscope was first invented, and they saw very, very tiny particles, because these particles are too small to see with a conventional glass, optics microscope, they basically said, there it is. There's the particle that causes disease. And that's what viruses have been called since that time. And they've identified several of these particles over the years, and they've associated them with certain diseases. But the truth is that they've never really satisfied the proof that those particles cause disease. So I don't like to use the term virus because, since it means poison, it only really applies to something that is bad, that would hurt us and cause injury and illness. So I like to, currently, I think the most scientific term would be exosome. And I'll explain what that is in a minute, but I just want to say that the way to prove that a certain agent causes a disease is pretty straightforward and common sense. All you do is you identify a disease that has a common set of symptoms. So like polio definitely meets that criteria because it causes a certain type of paralysis. And you would examine the people with those symptoms, and you should be able to isolate and purify whatever the agent is from the part of their body that's diseased. So in polio, it would be from their spinal cord, for example. So you should be able to take spinal cord tissue and chop it up and spin it in a centrifuge and isolate particles and purify them so that you can examine them and see what properties they have and what chemicals they're made of. And then you should also at the same time have some people without those symptoms, and also look at their spinal cords, and you should not be able to isolate the same thing. So that's really important. That's called a negative control. And the only way to be sure if something it only applies to your group that you're studying, you have to do a control to show that it doesn't apply to that group. And it's a fundamental principle of scientific experiment design. And then there are actually a couple more steps, but I would be happy just including the next step. And the next step is that you would take that isolated particle and put it in a healthy person or animal host and cause the same exact illness. Then you're supposed to be able to also isolate it and purify it from that person as well. That's the last step. But it's key that this step about causing an illness in a healthy person, because that's really the proof that it's the cause of the illness. Otherwise, it could just be associated with the illness. And associations are not the same as causality. And there was a famous newspaper article in New York City in a summer one year in the 70s when they had a heat wave. And the headline was, ice cream causes violence. And what happened was that ice cream sales that summer were increased, and so was violent incidents. But the thing is that one of those didn't cause the other. They were both caused by the heat. And so if you just assume an association is a causation, then you're going to make errors left and right. So that's why that step is so crucial.
Those steps that you were talking about, is that Cox postulates?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay. So so Cox postulates is what people have to, or should like is it the methodology that people should abide by when they're determining if a microbe is the cause of a disease?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Robert Koch was a German microbiologist and physician, and he was one of the main proponents of germ theory and in the early 20th century, or maybe it was the late 19th century. And he laid out those postulates as the rules to prove exactly what you said, and they've been pretty much agreed upon by consensus since that time. Even in medical school, when I had my microbiology course, it's one of the first principles that they taught us. But the thing is that they didn't actually go through the evidence to prove those postulates for any disease. They just told us that the disease was caused by this or that. And
which
so,
makes it a religion.
yeah, well, yeah,
pretty much, you know.
It certainly is dogmatic.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I never really looked at that until just recently.
So what were some things that you were being told about the coronavirus outbreak that made you like scratch your head and be like, something doesn't, like this doesn't fit, like something's not right?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of a numbers guy. I want the facts and the data, and that's how I try to look at things. So when this thing started going on in China, you know, people in my community and my family started becoming concerned about it. So I wanted to look into it and see, is it something to be concerned about? And I just started looking at the mortality figures, you know, how many people died. And it seemed like it was not dangerous at all in terms of that. Because, you know, I know this is hard for people to understand, but a lot of people die every day. The death rate of humanity is 1 per person, right?
Oh, well, I didn't know
Each,
that.
each person is going to die. So 1 death per 1 person,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
right? That's the death
Yeah.
rate. So, you know, we have 300 million people in our country. There's about 7 billion people in the world. So even if a small percentage of those people, you know, die, that's still adds up to a lot of people. So like in the United States, every citizen, the average risk in a given year, and this applies to you, it applies to me and every other person, the average risk of dying is 0.9%. So just under 1 in 100 chance of dying in a given year. Now, of course, for you, a young woman in good health, your actual risk, if we took those factors into account, would be significantly lower. But this is, you know, an average for the whole society. So you can see that. So we have about 300 million people in the country, right? So 1% of that is about 3 million people. So just under 3 million people, 2.7 million, if you want to be more precise, die every single year in the United States. So if you take that and compare it to, you know, the number of people dying from the COVID-19 virus, you see that it's a tiny, tiny number. And you can take some other relative numbers too, because in an average flu year, there's going to be between 40 and 60,000 deaths from the flu alone. There's going to be more than that from pneumonia. So, and the CDC puts out numbers on this. There's going to be more than that from suicide. And there's going to be more than that from medical errors. In fact, Johns Hopkins put out a study that 250,000 people in the United States, 250,000 a year, die from medical errors. And you can combine that with another study from the Journal of the American Medical Association showing that 128,000 people die from taking prescription drugs as directed a year. So that's from just medical causes that are well researched by the mainstream. That's 378,000 deaths a year from basically from healthcare. So compare that with, you know, I don't know what the current number is, but you know, in the tens of thousands, and it's way, way lower from COVID-19. So we don't have extreme policies stripping away our constitutional rights. Like right now, in most places in the United States and the world, people don't have the right to assemble. Free speech is being impacted with all of the censorship that's going on social media right now. We don't have the right to freedom of religion because no one's allowed to go to church and congregate and practice their religious beliefs. So these are, you know, fundamental First Amendment rights that have been stripped away. And why aren't they overhauling the healthcare system to prevent all these deaths that are way, way more with, I mean, they could put doctors in jail for making mistakes, right? That would be the same level of what they're doing to us now by placing us under house arrest. So as I looked at these numbers and realized that they really didn't amount to much, like the total deaths in Wuhan per population if I extrapolate that to the United States, it would only result in about 15,000 deaths total. You know, that's way less.
Out of 300, almost 300 million people, right? 350
exactly.
million. Yeah.
So it's barely a signal.
Yeah, it's not even 1%.
On the radar. So this discrepancy between the seriousness of whatever people have that are getting ill, and the measures that they're taking to strip away our rights and shut down the economy and shut down all small businesses and shut down public education, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
I saw you because I've been talking about this on my channel a lot because I had a friend that was a journalist, and even before COVID-19, he actually he was investigating the PCR test. And then there's like that famous Carrie Mullis interview, the inventor of the PCR test, and he was talking about the discrepancies in that. But I saw you give a really good like analogy on how the testing works, like with the baseball hat. Could you tell people about the test?
Yeah, so that's really important, and it's not just for PCR tests actually, because what is happening is that there's something called a gold standard test in medicine, and this is the test that is right 100% of the time. So, like for example, with cancer, this would be the tissue biopsy. If you just have an X-ray or an ultrasound or a CAT scan and you see a tumor, it doesn't tell you that it's cancer. And you can't, and no oncologist will actually give treatment based on that. They have to have the tissue sample because that's the gold standard. And when they come up with screening tests for cancer, like the PSA test, for example, those things, when they test that, they have to compare it to the gold standard. So they have a bunch of people with prostate cancer from a tissue biopsy, and they check their PSA and they see what the numbers are, and then they check it in healthy people, and they can calculate an error rate. So because the PSA is not the cancer, it's like a shadow of the cancer, it's a footprint of the cancer. And with all of these so-called viral illnesses, including HIV, hepatitis C, herpes simplex virus, cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, and now with the COVID-19, none of the tests routinely performed detect the virus. In other words, it's not a test for a virus. There's no virus that they get out of your body. There's no virus they look at under a microscope. There's no virus they culture. What they do is they testing something that is associated with the virus, a surrogate marker, a biomarker, they call it. You could call it a covariate if you're from a mathematical background. But the thing is that there's not 100% concordance between these things and the actual virus itself. So you're not measuring the virus, you're measuring something else. And so here's a practical life example. So let's say that we wanted to pick you out of a large crowd, right? You were going to be at a baseball stadium. So, but we're not going to look for your face. We're going to actually give you a special cap, right? We're going to give you a pink baseball cap. And it's not the typical one that people are wearing at that ballpark. So we put the cap on you, say, okay, go into the stadium somewhere in the crowd. And then I send out a team of people to look for a pink hat, not for you. And so then the people go out, they come back, they bring 4 people back, but none of them are you. And what happened was, there was someone selling that hat a few blocks away on the street. And as people walk into the stadium, a few people bought it and wore it. And the one that you were wearing, you were trying to be online for a hot dog, and it was really crowded, and somebody bumped you and the hat went off and somebody stepped on it and got it all dirty. So you just put it in the trash. So
forget this hat.
So we never found you.
Okay.
And we found false positives. Basically, we found people with the same hat, but they weren't the target that we were looking for. So the both tests that have been developed so far for COVID-19, the PCR test and the antibody test, they're both looking for a hat. They're not looking for a virus. So it's a big problem. And actually, since they've never actually found the virus and purified it, that hasn't been done at all with any of the patients who are sick. They've never compared the test to that gold standard because they haven't done the gold standard. So really, nobody could tell you what the error rate of the test is. Nobody could even tell you that it's measuring a virus because it's not. They could tell you that, oh, we've detected a piece of RNA. they could tell you we've detected an antibody, but what does that really mean? Since it's never been validated against the virus, which is what they're purporting that it actually tests for.
So is the importance of when they isolate and purify the virus, is it so nothing can contaminate that and give a false positive?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's why they have to do that. They have to, it's like they have to pick it up and put it somewhere, and there's nothing else contaminating it, so it doesn't read wrong.
Right. And so if they do that first and then they extract RNA or DNA from it, they can guarantee that that RNA or DNA came from that particle, because that's the only thing in the test tube that they're looking at. But if they just take like your lung fluid, which will have like cells from your own body, it has bacterial cells, may have fungal cells, may have other viruses if they exist or whatever they are, and it could have free-floating DNA or RNA. So if you just take that sample with all those things mixed together and test for a sequence of RNA, how do you know where it's from?
And they're not full sequences, they're looking for part sequences, is that right? So
Yeah,
that's
correct.
So,
but whether it's full or part, it's still they don't really know where it's come from, because this is how they actually say they identified that it was a coronavirus. They got this piece of RNA without knowing exactly the source, and they sequenced it in its entirety, and then they compared that sequence to other coronaviruses, and they said it was 79.5% similar. And that's how they say that it's a coronavirus. But I'll tell you that actually coronavirus genes are very similar to human genes. And so I don't know the exact percent homology, but why not say that it's human? If there also are similarities, it's like that doesn't really prove anything.
So the coronavirus, isn't the flu like a coronavirus, and there are other viruses? I mean, according to their version of what viruses are, isn't the flu also technically a coronavirus? So you can have the flu, and they're just doing guesswork when they pick this out, this sample of RNA out. They're just guessing. There's no methodology as to how they're picking this out, right? And then they amplify it, and if it has these certain antibodies, then they say that you test positive. Is that it?
Right. Well, the antibody test came later, and the studies of how they developed that have not been disclosed, but I can show you an FDA document about it that's quite interesting. But essentially, you're right about the other aspects, except for that the flu is a different virus. It's called influenza virus.
Yeah.
Coronaviruses are what we were told in medical school makes up about 50% of the common cold are caused by coronaviruses.
So you can just have a cold, and they could be like, "Oh, you have COVID-19. You're gonna die."
Since the test we don't know what it's actually measuring. It really is meaningless, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In fact, I haven't seen any evidence of any new disease whatsoever. What I think is really going on is just that they're labeling people who have the flu and pneumonia and perhaps other respiratory conditions like lung cancer and emphysema as having this virus, because the test would most likely be positive in anyone who's acutely ill. They did one study on it trying to estimate the false positive rate, because they couldn't calculate it, as I said, because there's no gold standard. And this article basically proves that, because otherwise they would have calculated and given you a definitive error rate. But they estimated the error rate as being 80% false positive. Mm-hmm. So that means 4 out of 5 people with a positive test don't have the disease. And even
is this the Chinese one?
Yeah, it's the Hong Kong study.
Okay.
It was actually retracted after.
I was about to say, after people started pointing it out, then they were like, exactly. Oh, well, it's retracted. Then you see the politics behind.
Right, but even the CDC on their website, they state plainly that a positive test doesn't mean that you have active disease from the virus. In other words, the virus could be present but in a latent stage, so that it's not causing active illness, and still give you a positive test. And this is what the CDC says. But they say that on the one hand, and on the other hand, they tell you if you suspect this virus caused it, even if there's no test, you should still say that this is what the cause is. So they're contradicting themselves in different parts of their own website.
So this whole thing where they're saying it came from a bat and viruses can be transferred to different species, and a tiger got it in the zoo, that's impossible, pretty much, right? It's not.
Well, it's really hard to tell about some of these things. I mean, traditionally in medical education, they tell you that viruses cannot be transmitted between species. And I think there's lots of just common experience for people who work with animals, like people who work with horses, for example, because horses get the flu. So every season, if you have enough horses, some of them are going to have the flu, and then you're going to be grooming them and working with them, and you're not going to get the flu from it. But is it so? I think what these particles that they've shown under the microscope are actually something different. Like, because they really exist, you can see the images. There are tiny particles, and they do have genetic material. But what I think they are something called exosomes. And exosomes were discovered about 30 years ago. And my hypothesis is that when they originally discovered viruses, they actually discovered exosomes and didn't realize what they were, because they were only looking at it as a cause of disease, because that's what they assumed it to be before they even saw it. And so they never really said, it wasn't like a discovery like this where they have a new microscope, they can see things they've never seen before, and they look and they're like, oh wow, what's that? Let me try and do some research and figure out what it is.
Yeah.
It was more like, we're looking for something small in this microscope that's making everybody sick with polio. And then when they see that, they're like, that must be it. And then they only look at it from that perspective, but they never satisfied Koch's postulates. So fast forward to the current situation about viruses and can they be transmitted. There's not really conclusive research on this. But let me tell you what exosomes are. And how they are similar or identical to a virus. But what they are is, and I would say it's the opposite of a virus because it's the opposite of poison. So they're little vesicles that are secreted by our own cells. And one of the functions that they do is they can actually gobble up poisonous material so that it does not cause damage to our cells. And there have been experiments that have shown this, and the cells that make exosomes in the presence of a bacterial endotoxin survive, and the cells that don't make exosomes perish. So it's a very important, you could think about it as part of our immune system. And the other role that it has is that it provides communication to remote parts of your body. So like if, let's say there's a toxic material or some other kind of insult in your nose, so the cells in your nose can make exosomes and put them out into the circulation, and they'll have a specific receptor on it, which is kind of like a special key. And they'll roam around your body through the blood and get to wherever their target is. And let's say their target is at the kidney. So at the kidney, there'll be a special lock that only that key fits, and it'll engage, and then it'll share its genetic material and other information. So these are, found in our body all the time. They, even when we're in a healthy state, we're putting them out to some degree. And when we experience some kind of disease, which could be almost anything, it could be a poison of various sorts, like a pesticide or herbicide, a pharmaceutical, a heavy metal, a bacterial toxins. If we're exposed to ionizing radiation, like when we get a CAT scan, for example, when we have like pneumonia or another acute illness, people with asthma attacks. So quite a number of conditions can basically cause your body to put out more of these.
Could poor nutrition cause you to get create exosomes too? Like
I haven't seen any studies on that. It's an interesting idea, actually, for a study to do that. But it has been shown that psychological stress can cause increase in exosomes, such as fear. Like a lot of people are experiencing a lot of fear right now. And I think that it would definitely have the effect of increasing the exosomes. But remember, the exosomes are actually our friend. They help us heal from an illness and provide support from other parts of our body toward the healing process. So is it possible? I mean, so we have, like, for example, that's been shown that there are exosomes in lung fluid. separately from the COVID-19 studies. I think the COVID-19 studies actually, the pictures are of exosomes and not of any virus. And it's been shown to be in your lung fluid, which is where they got the material from. So if it's in your lung fluid, when you breathe out, some of these particles come out in your breath. If you cough, same thing, right? Sneeze. So I don't think it's really known what happens to these exosomes when they go out of your body. Do they get into other people's bodies? It would certainly make sense that that could happen, but I would hypothesize that if that does occur, it would provide a beneficial effect, because it basically, the communication that's going on reflects what's in the environment. So if poison gets inside of our body, then there's poison in the environment. And if our body is prepared to react to that, to counteract it, and then we can spread these particles to other people in our community who have the same environmental exposure, then they can also, their bodies will be prepared. So this is not something that's experimentally proven, but I would say since it provides such a helpful healing function, that if it did spread to other people, it would basically help protect them against a common threat.
So this is like her immunity, basically.
Well, it could be thought about
So
that
like,
way,
yeah.
certainly, but
natural herd immunity, not
Well,
vaccine-induced immunity,
right. Well,
right?
I wouldn't use that term because there's really no proof at all of what they are saying herd immunity is. But this would be perhaps a real mechanism by which people, and I wouldn't necessarily say immunity, because you don't become immune to a poison the same way that they have this model of infection. But but the immune model is all based on germ theory, which is a theory and hasn't been proven. So I'd rather not talk about it in that respect. But I would say this is like maybe a method of molecular communication between people in a positive light, like some kind of community benefit program.
So when the exosomes absorb toxins, or you said they gobble up toxins, is it more like absorption, because they're not living technically, right? They don't fit the criteria for a living organism, right?
Exactly. So it's just a chemical process, and I'm not sure if it occurs by endocytosis or not, but that's the most common way that cells take up things from their environment, which basically is that their cell membrane, when something comes in contact with it, it invaginates and pinches off and makes a little bit of the membrane inside. So it's like a vesicle inside a vesicle. And you can certainly, if you look up endocytosis, you can find diagrams or short little videos that explain that if you want to see exactly how it works.
Yeah, I made a note. So would it be possible to use exosomes and mix it with other stuff to bioengineer a virus? I'm just asking this because there are people that are theorizing. They're saying, oh, they're bioengineering stuff to hurt us. And what are your thoughts on people that are saying that?
Yeah, sure. I definitely, so of course you can make people sick in a variety of ways. The easiest way is to just give them poison or put poison in their environment.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to make a bunch of people sick, I would put something toxic in, and I would drive an airplane over the area and spray it out if I wanted to cause a respiratory illness, because then it would be something people would breathe in, or have sanitation trucks go around and spray something, and that would be an easy way to make a bunch of people sick.
Or get them to, how about inject something into them, right?
Well, you could do that with drug addicts, or you could make it part of a vaccination program.
Yeah.
Where it's mandatory for everyone, but you'd have to go to that length. And perhaps there is some truth that that's being done with the vaccination program. But I think it would be extremely difficult to engineer some biologic agent that would, you give to one person and it spreads and makes everybody sick. I think that would be next to impossible. So what I think is much, much more likely, given that the policies don't match up to the seriousness of the so-called pandemic illness itself, there's got to be another explanation. And I don't know exactly what that is. I certainly have some suspicions. And you have to consider the other things that have been shut down, like the economic system, There's right now a major decrease in food production and other things that are going on. But if I were in a position where I wanted to bring about all these things and create a panic worldwide and say there's a new disease, the simplest thing to do would be simply to come up with a test that, and say this test says that you have this new illness, but actually it's just bogus and it's going to be positive in anyone who already has the pneumonia or the flu. And so you just relabel the people with the flu and pneumonia as having this illness and make it sound really scary, and maybe, focus some special images in the media to make it look like people are dying when it's really not what's going on. And I can give you an example of that. So I think that's most likely what has actually happened in this situation.
It sounds like marketing.
Yes,
it's pretty much it's just marketing.
it's in the the tools that were originally delineated by Edward Bernays, the father of public relations. But I've been in a lot of medical people have been in touch with me to give me information about what's going on, and there's been this pattern where the hospitals have been empty. And I've never experienced this in my career. I mean, hospitals are always full. Many times you have to wait for beds. There's bed shortages. So this is a weird situation. And what they've done is that they've taken only a fraction of the hospital beds and said these are the only beds that could be used for people who have the regular illnesses. And then the rest are reserved for virus patients. And those beds are all empty because there's hardly anybody sick, with this pandemic. And so all the people that have, heart failure and cancer and kidney failure and all these issues, they don't have access to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd be filling up all the hospitals normally this time of year and every time of year. So what I think is happening is they're dying at home instead of dying in the hospital. And then it has a big effect on the public perception because their neighbors are like seeing hearses come and take people away in their neighborhood. And then on the news, it says COVID-19, COVID-19. So they're assuming that these people are dying of COVID-19 when they're just dying of cancer and heart failure and Alzheimer's, the regular things. I mean, those things are not good, but it's no different than any other year. And even the paramedics and EMTs, when they are now getting tons of calls for CPR, because once again, the people are not in the hospital. So they're having to deal with them in the community. And even to those professionals, it looks like, oh my gosh, another COVID-19 death. And they don't realize that, they would have seen the same person same time last year, but they would have just, got a call earlier and they would have just brought him to the hospital and they would have died in the hospital. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I actually have someone doing research now to look at the numbers for flu and pneumonia and COVID-19 deaths from this year and previous years. And I think what we're going to find is that the total number of deaths for those three diagnoses is going to be virtually the same. But this year we're going to see COVID-19 and much lower flu and pneumonia.
Well, I've already heard figures like that too. They're saying pneumonia and flu are drastically dropping, and I'm like, well, because it seems like they're switching them out.
It's just
they're
relabeling.
They're scratching it out and writing.
It's a confidence trick. It's just relabeling.
So, go on.
No, that's all I had to say.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, how much do you think predictive programming, for example, movies like about viral outbreaks such as Outbreak, Contagion, The Stand, is playing into the reaction that people have too? Because it seems like, I don't know, I'll just stop there,
Yeah, well, there's a lot. I mean, all of the main media, including, TVs, movies, popular music videos, video games, right? All of these things have elements of mind programming, mind control programming in them. And this is something, that you have to investigate because there's even patents on it. So I'll give you an example with the TV. So originally, the television was patented, and there was a specific refresh rate that was in there, which is basically how many images per second on the TV screen, right? Because it's not a continuous image that's chaining; it's flashing, like an animated images, and that's how you see motion. And I think it's 50 per second, but don't quote me on that number. But essentially what it is it's a specific number that has been shown to put you into an alpha wave brain state. And so if you this is not, this is real medical science. When you get an EEG or an electroencephalogram, which is a test that's done for like seizures, for example, or it's done as part of a sleep study, it tells you the brainwave patterns in different parts of your brain. And there's, like alpha, beta, gamma, delta waves, etc. And they all represent different brain states. So like when you're meditating or in a trance, you might be in a theta state. That occurs during sleep as well. So the alpha wave state is what this frequency puts your mind in, and what that is a state of being highly suggestible. So it basically primes your brain to be able to accept new information and believe that new information or take it as valid or genuine. That's the alpha brain state. So the technology of the TV itself puts you in this state, and then whatever messages come across you're more likely to accept. And of course, there's definitely editorial control over what plays on those media. They, for example, I've been reporting a lot about the COVID-19 virus, and it's based on scientific evidence, and it's based on government websites and what they say. But yet there's been not one mainstream media outlet that has called me for an interview, even though there's been several million views of my material. And the reason is because they don't want my message getting out there because it doesn't fit with whatever agenda they have.
Well, they're funded by the pharmaceutical media, so why would they bite the hand that feeds them,
Yeah,
the pharmaceutical complex, I should say, not the media, but yeah.
That's definitely part of the equation.
So I'm checking time because okay, a few more minutes. Could you speak? I forgot what interview I saw, but you were talking about that that we need to still hug each other and love each other and have physical contact. So from, you're also a psychiatrist, so can you speak on the psychological benefits of human touch or lack thereof, and the psychological damage that social distancing will do to society?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a great topic to take it to the end of the show. So I'm definitely very concerned about these specific policies, especially social distancing and the wearing of masks. And I'll tell you that there is no evidence really that's credible at all that supports that social distancing can have any effect on any of these illnesses. It's been studied for the flu, and there's no conclusory evidence that it's effective at all. So this policy is not based on scientific evidence. It's based on some other rationale. But it has a profound effect on us because we are social creatures. We need to be around others. We need to be in communities. And I've even heard that some people are instructing others not to even hug their own children. People are saying not to touch parts of your own body. It's like, so it creates this fear of the other and fear of people, fear of humans. And that, we can't survive if we're afraid of each other, because we need to cooperate for survival because we're social creatures. And it's always been that way for humans. We're not leopards that are solitary creatures. So the, people being afraid of each other, people staying away. When I walk around the neighborhood, and someone's coming towards me, they don't make eye contact. They walk across the street. Not every single person. Some people are still normal, yeah. But most people have bought into this, that there is really something to be afraid of. And I think the masks are the most damaging because our face is capable of so many different expressions, and it's really a big part of the nonverbal communication between people. And that's where the real intimacy or closeness comes when you relate to people. It comes from the nonverbal communication. You know, you can be with someone and see their face and you know if they like you or not.
Mm.
And even if they're being really polite and they don't like you, you still know that.
Mm.
So it's really important information. You know, who wears masks? You know, criminals do, because they're trying to hide their identity and hide their emotions so that they can take advantage of you and mistreat you in that way. And what you said about touch, I hadn't really talked about that before, but that is a key thing, because you know, when you hug someone or touch someone in a tender way, your body releases this hormone oxytocin. And this is the same thing that happens when you nurse your child. And what it is it's this hormone that makes you feel that positive connection to the other person. And it's a chemical mechanism that brings relationships closer together, and it's totally vital to experience. So I would definitely, you know, encourage everyone out there not to stay away from people, but to relate to them in social and friendly ways. I would say to shake their hand, to give a hug. I was at the farmer's market this morning, which thankfully is still open in my area, and saw my friend there. And we had a conversation, we shook hands, and at the end, we gave each other a hug right in front of everyone. And I know people were looking at me saying, shame on you, but I felt like they need to see that we need to remain human. We need to, you know, relate to each other and support each other. And now is a crucial time to support each other, because there are a lot of things that are happening against us, and we need to stick together and stand up to protect our humanity and our freedom.
That's beautiful. It's very, very true. And I make a big stink on my channel about wearing masks, and I get people that get mad at me. And I was like, well, you know, there's not even the evidence that shows the virus is smaller than the holes in the mask. So why am I wearing one? You know, but it's also that lack of social connection too. That's just, it's creepy. It's like we're in a horror movie, you know?
Yes.
I wanted to close with that. I had one more question though, because that would have been a perfect way to close it. But I skipped this one. But you were talking about this Empower contract plan, and I know you probably want to talk about that, right? That you're working with somebody about consent and the mandatory vaccination program that looks like it's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then we'll close with that.
Yeah, no, this is a really important thing, because you know, talking about our rights being taken away and being forced to go along with various policies, you know, I realized, because I actually have started studying the law, but the real law, not like memorizing the statutes in the state or federal code, but like looking at the basis of law, different jurisdictions, what really applies to us. And I've learned so much, and I've learned that there are actually strategies that you can overcome many of these problematic things in society, especially things known as compelled performance statutes. So what that is anything that the government appears to require us to do, right? Like get a driver's license, get a medical license, get a license for a firearm, have mandatory vaccines, and other things. And what's actually true is that those things are really all voluntary. And by our own silence, we've agreed to participate in those, or sometimes we take action to agree, like we agree to be subject to a driver's license when we go to motor vehicles and pay the money and sign our name. But it turns out that we don't have to agree to these things, and that we can do something a little bit different. So with the vaccines or other mandates like smart meters, this has actually been done with smart meters already. That's why I bring up that example. And those are, you know, related to 5G in a way, that you can actually renegotiate this contract, because it's really a contract between the corporation, which is the government, and your corporation, which is your name in all caps. And I know that's a concept that I could spend a whole hour easily just talking on that. So just trust me that it's true, that you're basically, it's a corporation representing you, and the corporation of the government makes these contracts. So you can basically renegotiate. So it goes like this. You say, and you send this to like the health commissioner for your state or for your county, because they're the ones who are responsible for carrying out this law, and they've taken a constitutional oath to protect your rights. And so you send them a letter basically saying, I would be happy to agree to take your mandatory vaccine on the condition that you can prove to me that it's safe and effective. And then I lay out how you would prove that. And I lay it out in a real scientific way that would prove it beyond a doubt, not in that they could just show me studies that they've done that don't prove it and say that it proves it. So you have to be very careful how you create this document and put everything very specifically. And then I say, well, if you're unable to prove this and you still require me to get a mandatory vaccination, then I will hold you personally liable for $10 million. And that's not like when you sue a politician and the state pays out of the state budget. You're actually doing this personally to the flesh and blood person who's in that position. And it's based on, because they took a constitutional oath to protect your rights, and this would violate your rights, so they would be personally responsible. So in other words, the money would come from their own bank account. And if they didn't pay it, you could actually get a commercial lien on them through the court based on this document, and then they wouldn't be able to access their money or take out a loan. So it could be extremely devastating to these people to have this liability. So when this technique was attempted for the smart meters, and it was done in 2 different cities in different states, basically the outcome was that several politicians resigned. One CEO of a utility company who it was sent to resigned, and none of the people who sent in these letters had to put a smart meter on their house or pay a penalty. So it was very powerful results. And I'm very hopeful that it will have the same kind of results when applied to these vaccines. So right now, the document is being finalized and the organizational structure is being finalized to have people be able to do this in great numbers. And many people have already been interested and are kind of waiting for this to be available. And so I would encourage people to check this out at the InPower website. That's IN Power. And if you just put that in a search term, you'll find it right away. And on Vimeo, there's a 2-part video that kind of goes over the process in a bit more detail than I've laid out here. And I would encourage people to check that out. But on the InPower website, you can sign up for a membership, and it's only $25 a month. And you won't need very much time on there to get this document done. So it's not going to be a very expensive proposition. And if you have a membership on there, you'll be notified when the document is ready to go. And they have people who can answer questions to make sure that you fill it out the right way, and that there's a process to it that takes several steps. So they want to make sure that they're able to have people get it right. So definitely check in with that. As soon as it's ready to go, I'll be talking it up as much as I can to get the word out. But there's already people with much larger audiences than I have also be doing that.
Okay, yeah, I definitely will be too. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaufman. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so my website is finally up and running as of today. So I want to encourage people to find me there. That's andrewkaufmanmd.com. That's AndrewKaufman, MD like medical doctor.com.
Okay.
And please check me out on YouTube as well. Andrew Kaufman is my channel, but the show is called Medicamentum Authentica.
You changed it.
Medicine.
You changed it, right? Because wasn't the YouTube channel Medicamentum Authentica?
Well, actually, the channel was always in my name, but if people search my name, they get the comedian Andy Kaufman.
Oh yeah.
But if you search Medicamentum Authentica, right. you'll get my channel.
Okay.
So,
I forgot Andy Kaufman. I'm sure you get that all the time.
Yes, I definitely do.
All right. Thank you so much. Have fun tonight. And thank you so much for coming on my show. And I really appreciate it. All right, guys, that ends our show. Peace, truth, love. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Hold on one second. I'm going to